Welcome back to Surfline Live. We're here with our continuous coverage of the hurricane force low that's pushing off the northeast U.S. coastline right now. There's lots of weather occurring over the East Coast right now. The wave event is just starting to unfold. Surf's not really good anywhere yet on the East Coast, but that's going to change in a pretty big way as we move through the weekend and really into next week. I'm Surfline Director of Forecasting Mark Willis. Alongside me, I've got Rob Mitstifer, fellow Surfline forecaster. We're here from our Outer Banks office. How's it going, Rob? We've got a little wind outside, don't we?
Yeah, Mark, great to be here. Thanks for that intro. We're here on the Outer Banks, and it is blowing quite strong here. Just touching on this system, it's quite impressive. This is kind of what we live for as meteorologists. Seeing something this impressive on the charts, we probably picked up on this about a week out. I mean, at that point, we weren't sure about the specifics, but we were pretty sure something was going to happen, and here we are today. It's Friday, and we got a ton of wind all across the East Coast. It's snowing in parts of New Jersey, New York, and New England. A lot of rain on coastal New England, as we'll look at some of these cams today. It's just a super interesting scenario. Really kind of gets our juices flowing as meteorologists, huh, Mark?
It does. And, right now we're looking at four locations throughout the Western Atlantic. We've got Soup Bowl that's got a northeast swell, actually not from the storm that's moving off the coast right now. It's from a system that's in the north central Atlantic and has been there for a couple of days. We are also looking at Matunic, Rhode Island. Things just getting going there. There's a little bit of swell in the water, but more wind than waves, and a little bit of weather as well. It looks pretty much blown out there. And we got Lido Beach in western Long Island, New York. Again, the surf event really hasn't started there. And then Hudson Avenue and Long Beach Island, which I believe you've spent a little time there, haven't you, Rob?
Yeah, I grew up going to Long Beach Island, New Jersey, all the time, and that's kind of Hudson Avenue. That's kind of the northern end of Long Beach Island, not necessarily my go-to spot. But I mean, as we see some fun-looking waves come in, it might be a little deceiving right now as we check in on some wind obs coming off. We have offshore winds at that Hudson Ave cam as well as Lido Beach, but we're seeing sustained winds around 30 knots, even stronger, gusting up to 45 knots, which is basically unsurfable. It's really hard to catch waves at that wind speed when it's pushing you kind of back towards out to sea. What's your experience with that, Mark? How do you would you paddle out in this?
Oh gosh, man. I would paddle out in the upper left location, I think, at Soup Bowl. But speaking of wind, we had a little scare before we started, a little power outage. We didn't even know we were going to be able to do this live because the wind is blowing so hard in the Outer Banks that gosh, it's probably 40 to 50 mile per hour on the gusts. But we have power, a stable internet, everything's going good, but they are out of school today. Let's take a look at the latest Lola projection that we're showing now. This is, I think, this morning's run, and this is the storm getting going just off the East Coast for this weekend that you're seeing now. And those are wave heights in the 25 to 40 foot range, and 25 to 40 feet in itself might not be that big of a deal. But the thing is, the amount of real estate those seas cover is pretty substantial in this scenario. Yesterday, when Kurt Corte and I were on, we were talking about the size of this thing is really what's making it so special. There's really three things that we look for in a big wave event. It's the storm strength, obviously, how strong the wind speeds are, the storm movement, if it's moving at you or away from you, or it's going to be stationary, and then the size is kind of the third X factor. And this one is definitely not lacking in that size factor.
Yeah, all three of those, if we had check boxes for each of them, it'd be checking all those boxes. And really, I think the size factor and the movement factor are kind of the keys here as we, obviously, this is a very large storm as we're looking at with the latest Goes East satellite animation. You could just see the wind field with this thing is absolutely massive, stretching from Florida all the way to the Canadian Maritimes. So yeah, like I said, the size is there. The speed, the movement of this is actually very, very slow, and we're expecting a very slow track over the next several days. It's almost good as just kind of meander, kind of north of Bermuda, south of the Canadian Maritimes, really into like next Tuesday, which is really impressive. I mean, a storm this big, you could just imagine how it's influencing other parts of the atmosphere as well. It's just a total beast. And of course, when it's just kind of sitting out there, it's not going to be quite as strong come Tuesday, but it's going to be pumping out swell the whole time. And this is going to be a significant event we're probably going to be talking about for a while.
So, Rob, you're on the forecast for the northern half of the coast today. We split our forecast shifts up by stretches of coastline. And first of all, I know you're busy today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day to talk to everybody that follows Surfline on Facebook and on YouTube. We really appreciate it. But you're looking at the northern half of the coast, and there's a couple of areas that we're kind of targeting for the best surfing conditions from this event, but not everywhere, especially the entire time that we're going to see surf is going to have good winds and conditions. What are a couple of places that you think are going to be highlights as far as really good surf through this event?
Yeah, great question. That's kind of the $1 million question everyone wants to know, right? So, like I just touched on, the size and the slow exit speed of this system is really going to limit a lot of the potential for a lot of the breaks along the northern half of the East Coast as well as the southern half. But basically, what we're looking at as far as standout locations, what we're looking at right now, the Wall in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire, this is not really going to be one of them, at least in the initial stage of this swell. I'm eyeing next week for a little bit of better conditions, but as far as the key spots across the northern half of the East Coast, I'm definitely keying in on the western half of Long Island. That's looking pretty impressive for this weekend and early next week, as well as some other southern facing spots of New England, where they can really handle the strong north winds we're going to see for the next few days. So yeah, really, it's going to come down to the exposure to the long period east swell that this system's going to be pumping out, as well as being able to handle those northerly winds. And here we're looking at Matunic in Rhode Island, and this is going to be one, Cam, to watch over the next few days. I'm pretty sure this is going to be one of the standout spots, not just within Rhode Island, but across the whole East Coast this weekend. This is kind of a cool little break. It's cobblestone reef break bottom. It can be kind of shifty, definitely kind of an A-frame peak, but I'm feeling like this is going to be a pretty good spot to be over the weekend.
Yeah, we're showing the forecast here now in the bottom right of this image, and this is a hard forecast for Rhode Island because most of Rhode Island faces south, and there's obviously some exceptions to that complex coastline that face different directions, but there's a lot of east in this swell, and there's going to be times when it's east southeast and southeast, but still, whenever you have any bit of east in the component of the swell direction for Rhode Island, it makes it really challenging, but to figure out where it's going to get in, and luckily we've got some nearshore models that help us figure those kind of difficult questions out. But always the east and southeast swells can be challenging up there, can't they?
Definitely. You have shadowing from some of those offshore islands, and that can kind of make or break a certain swell. A lot of the southerly wind swell events we get can kind of be blocked by some of those islands. So we'll see kind of some swell events come in a little below average, or at least below what we expect. But this swell just looks strong enough that it's going to have enough energy to push swell into Rhode Island. Of course, like I mentioned, as we can look at our wind dashboard below, we're going to see a lot of north winds over the next few days. And Rhode Island, of course, mostly faces south. There's some east-facing breaks. There's even a little bit different coastline at some of the beach breaks there. But basically, these north winds mean that the south-facing breaks are going to be the standout spots of Rhode Island over the next few days. Of course, they're looking a little breezy. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge, and we have that written in the forecast, some challenging conditions. Be prepared to paddle. I'm going to say that. But basically, these south-facing breaks like Matunic in Rhode Island are going to be pretty special over the coming days.
If you're just joining us, that smart young man speaking was our new forecaster at Surfline, Rob Mitstifer. I'm Surfline Director of Forecasting, Mark Willis. We're here on our East Coast, at our East Coast headquarters on the Outer Banks, going over the forecast and live conditions associated with the hurricane force low that's now moving offshore the Northeast United States coastline. And we're taking a live look at a variety of cams up and down the East Coast and into the Caribbean Sea, and super excited about this storm. And Rob, you've been with us for about a year now, and I'm curious, is this, the most challenging or the most substantial swell event that you've seen since you've been here? It's a pretty special one.
Yeah, as far as wintertime swell events go, we had a couple stronger nor'easters earlier in the winter. Definitely, those are always interesting. But this kind of reminds me of this past fall, the tropical season that we went through, specifically September, where we had a multitude of systems back to back to back, and it seemed like kind of never ending. But this This system is pretty darn complex. It's just massive in size, as we were seeing this goes east satellite animation on the bottom right here. It's just so large. It's slow moving. There's a lot of complexities to this, but you know, overall confidence is relatively high in the forecast for this weekend, especially moving into next week. It obviously becomes a little less certain, but because this system's moving really, really slow over the next few days, I mean, if you check out our dashboards, we have a lot of these spots are going to see pretty solid long period east swell for the next several days. And, obviously those south facing breaks favor the north winds, like this spot in Rhode Island. But it's definitely going to be interesting. I'll be watching the cams this weekend. We plan on doing some more Facebook lives over the coming days, so be sure to check out for those.
And it's nice that we're starting March off, with a bang, because oh gosh, February was incredible too. I mean, I'm looking, I got a sheet in front of me showing me the average wave heights at key locations up and down the East Coast and West Coast from February. And February was above normal everywhere. So now, we had a great February, and we're starting March off pretty well. A couple of standout locations from February. Gosh, Florida was probably in Florida in the Southeast U.S. I'm looking at the washout in South Carolina, over 500% of normal, the number of fair or better days there. And Florida, 350% above or of normal. Fair or better days and above average surf heights, those locations as well at Cocoa Beach Pier and Sebastian Inlet. So we're starting off March with a bang after a good February, and now we're taking a look at Long Island, New York, which we think is going to be one of the hot spots for this swell event in general, huh?
Yeah, Lido Beach, as we're looking at right here, one of the better spots right near Long Beach, New York. If you can remember back several years ago, there was the Quicksilver Pro Long Island event, which was a little bit further west of Lido Beach, kind of in downtown Long Beach. But yeah, Lido Beach is a great beach break. And, we got some waves rolling in with some strong offshore winds at the moment. But this spot's going to look pretty different come tomorrow and Sunday, especially, and even into Monday and Tuesday. We're looking pretty good in Lido Beach the next few days.
Yeah, but right now, not the best surf. We've got 30 to 40 knot offshore winds. There's a little surf, but as Rob mentioned, it's going to be changing quite significantly over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Definitely, as we can see the forecast. The forecast I updated this morning in the bottom right corner. We have some very goods in there. That's when Long Island's good, it's definitely worthy of a very good. And some people can even argue it might be better than that. We'll see how that turns out. But basically, when you have a strong east southeast swell, north winds, that's a pretty favorable scenario for pretty much all breaks of Long Island. Of course, you come into the question of, is it going to be too much swell, too much current? And luckily, a lot of the Western Long Island breaks have a lot of groins and jetties to kind of break up that current, which, I'm from New Jersey, and we have a lot of those too. Unfortunately, the Outer Banks really is kind of lacking in that. But basically, when you have a big swell like that kind of pushing across the beach, kind of side shore, you can get a lot of side shore drift, which, of course, that's not bad if you're willing to walk back or whatnot. But luckily, all those groins and jetties, like we see in Long Beach, New York, or Rockaway, that can act to break up the swell and break up the current, and you can actually get these little rip currents forming around each groin, which help you make the paddle out a little easier. And it's really, really quite interesting how those kind of hardened features can affect a given beach break significantly.
And if you're wondering what we're looking at here, this is our new regional forecast that we just recently launched on new.surfline.com. This is for Nassau and Queens and Western Long Island. And this product is intended to just give you a snapshot of what you can expect at the better, kind of more exposed beaches in a particular region. And the great thing about this is that we've evolved this product with this launch. Is in the past, we were only issuing one forecast a day for the morning hours for the next 7 days, but now our team of meteorologists is issuing AM and PM forecasts for all the places that we cover. And we also, to complement this, have a new format for our premium analysis as well, which is where we analyze swell and conditions through text, graphics, and video. But Rob, maybe give us a little explanation of how this is actually easier for you to tell our users when the surf's going to be good.
Definitely. The biggest one of the bigger changes most people will notice straight off the bat is the AM and PM are now separate, which totally helps in first of all forecast communication, and second of all just understanding when and where is best to surf. So I mean, Saturday's a great example. Also, next Tuesday looks like a great example, but I'll specify in Saturday. It's looking like we'll see a slow build in surf heights through the day Saturday, and definitely stronger offshore winds in the morning. So it combine that with the morning high tide. It's looking like Saturday morning might be not quite up to par as far as Saturday afternoon is concerned. So basically, in scenarios like this, it's just a lot easier for us forecasters to communicate when is the best time to surf. That's our job, to communicate to our users when is the best time to surf. And another example is next Tuesday. I was just looking at, after this storm, which of course we're focusing on this, there looks like there's going to be something else around Wednesday next week, and that might start to influence winds in a negative way for Long Island around Tuesday. But we'll still have pretty solid surf in the water on Tuesday with probably light winds in the morning, Tuesday morning. So that's another scenario where, Tuesday morning is probably going to be pretty fun. Tuesday afternoon, probably see some deteriorating conditions, which, that's a pretty typical scenario for most places, especially a summertime pattern on the East Coast. Definitely Florida sees a lot of the diurnal pattern with favorable conditions in the morning and less favorable in the afternoon. As we'll touch on Florida in a bit, but here we are back at Lido Beach. Like we said, some waves coming in, but it doesn't look very appetizing with those really strong and gusty offshore winds pushing 40 knots right now.
And of course, to complement the regional forecast that our team of forecasters put out twice a day, we've got a number of spot forecasts as well from our Lola model. If you want to drill down conditions further for your area, definitely check out both the regional product for kind of a high level overview that our team's looking at, and then you can drill down with those spot forecasts as well. So we're down into New Jersey now, where we actually had a little bit of snow earlier. Again, not seeing the best of surf right now. Although, it looks, every once in a while you'll get a set that's funnish here, but New Jersey, for the most part, is not, especially the beginning of this event, is not going to be a hot spot. Is that kind of what you're seeing, Rob, too, and maybe some improvement down the road?
Yeah, I might actually trend up the forecast rating for tomorrow, this afternoon's update. So look out for that. But basically, when we get good conditions in Long Island, those northwest winds, Jersey's usually not, the best. Of course, there are some of those spots in southern New Jersey that have a little bit more south-facing exposure, so north winds will be kind of favorable down there. Although when we're doing our forecast boxes for the entire state of New Jersey, we can't really just think about a select few breaks as far as what the rating is. So basically, New Jersey's not going to be the best. There will be windows, that's for sure. It's going to be big there. I believe we have double overhead plus there on Sunday. So that's pretty impressive for New Jersey. A lot of those breaks, a lot of the better breaks can hold that size as we're bringing this forecast up right now. So Sunday looks pretty large and not great. Saturday morning, so that's tomorrow morning, worth keeping tabs on that. I'm thinking about upping that a little bit for this later update that I do later today. But basically, we'll have some windows of better conditions probably earlier next week. Not ideal. Like a lot of New Jersey likes to see west northwest or even straight west winds, and I don't think we're going to get that for until maybe later next week, like I just mentioned, that other storm. So basically, this New Jersey forecast not looking quite like Long Island, but there will be windows if you know where to look.
I looked back at some data off of Jersey, the 09 buoy, and our forecast for the 09 buoy is about, when it peaks, about 12 feet at 15 seconds. And that height, we see that several times a year, but that combination of height and period is fairly rare. And I did a historical search to see the last time, when was the last time where we saw something above that height and period threshold of 12 at 15 seconds. And you got to go back to 2010. November 12th, 2010 was 12 feet at 16 seconds. Not a tropical event, another non-tropical event that formed south of Canadian Maritimes, and was actually a pretty similar event, and produced widespread good surf throughout the Caribbean and also the East Coast as well. But there were a number of events that have surpassed this wave height threshold. I'll just rattle off a few of them. Obviously, Sandy in 2012 had Seas upward of 20 to 30 feet when it was just offshore. Isabel in 2003, Irene in 2011, and Hurricane Gloria in 1985 were all kind of in that 20 to 35 foot range, just off of New Jersey. So this one's not going to be as big as those per se, but the combination of height and period, 12 feet to 15 seconds, is actually pretty rare.
Definitely. That's impressive. That's no joke. 12 at 15, that's enough to make Mavs break, you know. But basically, Jersey, 12 at 15 is not going to be, you know, Mavs triple, quadruple overhead, that size. You know, the beach breaks just can't quite harness that energy the same way. But yeah, going back to some of those analog events, a lot of tropical systems that track really close to the coast here, they tend to be more intense because, you know, this system is expected to become hurricane force, but just its broad scale, it's just not going to be as close to the coast when it's as strong as some of those other events, especially like Sandy. So just the 12 of 15 is just impressive in my book. But, you know, like I said before, the winds aren't going to be ideal. But some of those southern New Jersey breaks, or even some of the novelty spots in New Jersey, you know, Mark, we were joking about a certain bay spot in another state that could be working this weekend, but keep looking. That's for sure.
It's okay. We can say the Chesapeake Bay. Yeah. You know what? I'm from that area, and I'm sure there's a couple of hardcore Chesapeake Bay surfers that I know listening, like Carter Ficklin and Brian Vanderveer. Those guys are on it, and they're always on it, and that's a special place. But yeah, there's going to be a couple of novelty locations that are going to turn on during this event, and we're looking at Hudson Avenue right now in central New Jersey. And if you're just joining in right now, I'm Surfline forecaster Mark Willis, and I've got Rob Mitstifer with me, another forecaster, and we're here at our office on the Outer Banks, and we're streaming live and analyzing the conditions associated with the hurricane force low that is pushing off the northeast U.S. coastline right now, and it's about to set up a lot of surf up and down the East Coast.
Yep, one of those systems that we're probably going to be talking about for a few years. I mean, if this comes to fruition as far as what we expect, there's going to be certain parts of the East Coast, as mentioned before, some southern facing spots of New England, Long Island. It's going to be pretty impressive as we see a decent looking set come through at Hudson Ave, although it might be a little deceiving with how strong the offshore winds are. There's another peak right there, but basically it's probably not that great out there right now. Probably really hard to surf. We're just pulling up some wind observations right now. We're seeing northwest winds, 25 to 40 knots across Long Beach Island, where this Hudson Ave cam is located, which really the average surfer would just step out their door and be like, this is not surfable. Kind of what we're seeing on the Outer Banks today. We had some waves this morning, but just insanely strong and gusty offshore winds, gusting up to 55 knots across the Outer Banks. Not quite impressive in New Jersey at the moment, but still borderline unsurfable.
As we're waiting to spread down the coast here a little bit, Rob, it looks like, yeah, there we go. We're now in Melbourne Beach, Florida. This is our Ocean Ave cam, where the surf is not great, but it sure looks warm down there, and warmer than it is up here on the Outer Banks. And I think there are some areas, and especially like the Treasure Coast, that had a moment of pretty good surf this morning, but north winds have since spread down the coast and is impacting conditions. And we are expecting a pretty substantial swell for Florida as well. There are, it doesn't look like this weekend is going to be that good, but we're kind of eyeing early to mid next week for some potential cleanup down there too.
Yeah, what happened this morning in Florida is the cold front that's associated with this developing system actually pushed through the state, which can set up good winds in parts of the region. So like we said, that Treasure Coast, even Palm Beach area, saw some favorable conditions this morning. However, that's changed since we moved through the day. And looking at Ocean Ave and Melbourne Beach, which is technically central Florida, surf doesn't look that great right now. It's rideable, it's warm. If it was summertime, might be some people out, no takers at the moment. But basically, as we can see the forecast in the bottom right, we're not looking that great over the next few days in Florida. A lot of pours, but early next week is worth monitoring. One of our forecasters, Mike Watson, is on this forecast. He'll be on through the weekend. So that's definitely someone to keep an eye on. It's definitely looking solid, that's for sure. but basically not great conditions, maybe some novelty spots, but overall not great conditions until early next week.
And we're not showing Wednesday here right now, but on the screen. But Wednesdays, it looks like definitely a day to pay attention to. And Mike Watson down there been doing this forecast for eons, decades. I don't, when I have a question about the forecast for Florida, I ask Mike Watson because he is on it. And we also have Charlie Hutcherson down there, another forecaster who writes a lot of stories for us. And I think the other night, it was 2 nights ago, Charlie wrote a story comparing the forecast for this event to the St. Patrick's Day event of 2008 and the February 2015 event. That's a great story. If you get a chance to check that out, please do so. It looks like we did get up the forecast for later next week. So definitely, if you're in Florida, pay attention to mid to late next week, because it looks like the winds are going to start cooperating around that time frame.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, that next system could actually move through and start to influence winds. That thing will have a trailing cold front as well, possibly around Wednesday, Thursday. So that'll start to influence winds. So be sure to check out the premium forecast that Mike Watson updates twice a day.
And if you're just joining us, that's Rob Mitstifer that was just talking, forecaster from our office on the Outer Banks. I'm Mark Willis, Director of Forecasting. Thanks for tuning in. We are analyzing the conditions associated with the hurricane force low that is just pulling off the East Coast now. We've got a pretty special wave event unfolding, and it looks like we're going to have waves up and down the East Coast, throughout the Caribbean, through the Canadian Maritimes for several days, well into next week. And we're going to be doing this off and on throughout the duration of this event. So like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be alerted when we do this, because it's going to be a fun few days to watch this thing evolve, as this thing continues.
Yeah, Mark. So basically, this is kind of what we're looking at as far as satellite animation go. The bottom right, that's our latest. That's the new Goes East satellite that brings super high resolution satellite imagery to our fingertips, which I personally love. All meteorologists love, and even any weather enthusiast is pretty stoked on this kind of clarity from satellites. It's just crazy as we see this impressively broad system just starting to push. It's tracking very slowly to the southeast at the moment, which is really just a good thing for Long Island. Really, it's just going to set up days and days of waves for the whole East Coast and Caribbean. But Mark, I do have a question for you. So let's say a few days ago you were looking at the charts and being like, oh, this looks pretty impressive. So where's the one place you would go kind of to score this swell?
I would probably go to the Caribbean if I could go anywhere. But the thing is with the Caribbean, you got to be really careful, because we've talked about how big this storm is. The wind field associated with it is going to impact the Caribbean. So a lot of the Leeward Islands and the central and the western part of the Caribbean are actually not going to have great conditions. So somewhere east and southeast of that is probably where I'd think about. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a number of places up and down the East Coast that eventually get good. We talked about Long Island, we talked about South Jersey, eventually Florida will see its moment as well. And it's obviously a lot warmer down there than it is up here, Rob.
Yeah, and here we are looking at the Soup Bowl cam live from Barbados, and the swell they're seeing here right now is actually from a previous low pressure system that kind of pushed into the central Atlantic. That was impressive on its own. That thing had hurricane force winds directed at the Caribbean as well. If you've been following any Puerto Rico Instagram accounts or whatnot, you've seen that Puerto Rico has been very good the last few days. Barbados as well. The trades have been light, just a generally pretty favorable pattern. And it looks pretty darn warm there. So kind of breaking the mold from the typical winter stuff we got going here on the East Coast. But pretty much, Mark, I have one of these, basically one of our climatology sheets that looks back on February right now. And it's interesting to note that a lot of Florida and the Southeast, as well as the Outer Banks, saw some pretty fun surf throughout February. I don't know if you're a surfer listening in from those regions, you might agree. And what do you think? How would you expect March to shape up based on this pattern coming up?
Well, it's obviously the first part's going to start off pretty darn good, because we got this thing, sitting off the Northeast coast. So I'd be surprised if in the entire month numbers, at least the averages. So yeah, I mean, I think because we're going to start off so good, I could see it being at least average, if not a little bit above average. But while we've got the Soup Bowl and now the Ocean Avenue Cam and Melbourne Beach, I did want to mention something else about Florida. Also did some analysis on the 41010 buoy, the outer Canaveral buoy, and Lola has the swell peaking there 17 feet at 15 seconds. That's a really, really powerful swell. And again, I mean, there's been a number of events that have seen wave heights above that. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But again, it's that combination of height and period, swell height and swell period, that really makes this swell event special. You have to go back to Hurricane Irene in 2011. August 26, 2011 was the last time that that combination of height and period was surpassed. And that was like 9 meters, so 30 feet or something at 16 seconds. Some other substantial events that you might remember in Florida from just a pure awe perspective of high seas. Let's see, Hurricane Jean in 2004 and Francis, both of those events in 2004, around 30 to 35 feet at 14 seconds. Hurricane Floyd in 1999. 33 feet at 14 seconds as well. Hurricane Sandy in 2012, that was a memorable event for a number of reasons. I remember Pump House in South Florida, after Sandy passed, they had, a 20-foot swell or something like that with offshore winds. It was just incredible. But yeah, Sandy, Irene, Francis, Floyd, Jean, all those events were produce higher wave heights than this event that we're seeing here. But again, that combination of height and period, 17 feet at 15 seconds is pretty unique.
Definitely. And the more we look at this Lola animation we have in the bottom right, the more this kind of reminds me, just the track and the size, of course, not quite as impressive, but do you remember Hurricane Bill from, I think it was 2008? It took a very, very slow track just between the Outer Banks and Bermuda, and kind of lingered in that zone for several days, and it just pumped out swell for days and days and days. And of course, tropical systems tend to be a little more compact and tight wound, so to speak, as compared to these wintertime extratropical systems. Especially this system we're tracking right now. It's just so massive that you almost have to take a step back. And as we see this low goes east satellite animation in our bottom right, it's just impressive. It's influencing winds from Canada down to Florida, all the way into the Great Lakes and across to Bermuda. It's just absolutely massive. And you don't really see systems this big super often. So it's just, it's just an awe to just stare at this thing. It's just like eye candy.
And Rob, we got a couple of Facebook comments and questions that I'm going to address. And if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to get those out there and we'll do our best to respond to them. Jess Seda, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, asked us to address the effects of the North Carolina coast. I think we can do that because we're sitting here on the Outer Banks in Nags Head, North Carolina, at our East Coast headquarters. And it's windy, Jess. It's pretty damn windy up here. We're actually not expecting this to be a great event here, or at least the first part of the event. It's going to be large and in charge, 15 to 20 foot plus at 13 to 15 seconds is kind of what we're looking at. And a lot of north winds this weekend, which are going to be hard to hide from. But early to mid next week, things should start gradually calming down and improving. It's going to take a while on the Outer Banks, but there are some locations in southern North Carolina that are a little more sheltered, that won't be quite as gnarly as it is up here on the Outer Banks. And they could get some good waves down there for, places like New Hanover County and around Wilmington and Wrightsville by, early to mid next week.
Yeah, this is one of those kind of typical scenarios where the Outer Banks is just going to be too big. It's just going to be massive. The Outer Banks is just so exposed regarding the way the coastline faces. It's just open to those northeast swells, as well as the continental shelf is just not very far extending out from the coastline, which, a far extending continental shelf will really kind of sap the long period swell energy. We see that happen in the southeast, which is actually a good thing in this swell, because it's just going to be too big on the Outer Banks for for days and days. Of course, winds are looking lighter next week, so definitely keep tabs on that. But yeah, the southeast coast could see some pretty fun waves off this. As you know, one of my buddies, he went to school in Wilmington, and he's always like, you know, whenever the Outer Banks is too big, Wrightsville Beach can really be really fun and just playful size. You know, northwest winds are not great for all the Outer Banks, but down there in New Hanover County and South Onslow, that's a straight offshore, and they love those winds.
That's a good point, and a great rule of thumb. And actually, the Crystal Coast, and just north of Wrightsville, the Emerald Isle, Atlantic Beach area, it's a little more challenging for these events to get in there. But I spent some time down there when I was in the Weather Service, and it's really interesting on these more easterly angled events where it can. Atlantic Beach is kind of shadowed, and then as you head west towards Emerald Isle, it gets bigger on these events. So keep an eye out for that as well. And I think I addressed that question from Jess Seta. Let's see if we got another one about the southeast North Carolina coastline. So I think we answered those. And again, get your questions in if you want Rob and or myself to address them. We will do our best. But as we wait for some more comments to come in, we're looking at Soup Bowl, Rob. Not a bad place to be, huh?
No, I mean, it's probably pretty big there on the sets. It can be deceiving from this higher angle camera view, but I mean, the forecast for Barbados is looking pretty impressive. And this next Swell event, it's going to be kind of borderline shadowed, because if you can imagine, Barbados gets kind of shadowed on the northwest swells from the other windward islands. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. When we see these really large swells that can kind of overload a lot of breaks. Here's someone riding this fun little right, but we can see some breaks are just going to be overloaded. We expect the northwest part of Puerto Rico to be just pretty much maxed out, and they're going to see pretty bad winds during the peak of this swell. But Barbados going forward, that's looking like one of the better areas of the Caribbean. And actually, it's a fun fact, we're actually going to see some of this swell filter into northern Brazil as well. So it's not just a North American Caribbean event. Some of this swell will make it to South America, and of course, Europe's on deck next, as well as Northern Africa. But that's heading into next week.
We're getting a lot of questions on Facebook about still more about the Southeast. We didn't cover South Carolina, so we got a couple of folks from the Garden State that are interested. And the initial part of this event just going to be too much north in the swell, but it eventually will go more east northeast and even easterly, and that's when you're going to want to think about South Carolina as more east swell fills in there, and that timing is going to be more like late weekend, but especially early to mid next week is when we think South Carolina is going to get some fun, but not great waves. Going to have to watch out for some winds, but yeah, there is a decent opportunity for funnish surf in South Carolina early to mid next week as well.
Yeah, South Carolina, like I mentioned before, it can struggle on these long period swells with how large the continental shelf is. Actually, funny when we saw a lot of these past hurricanes, same scenario. We see long period energy anywhere from 14 plus seconds. You'll see on the buoys that like the South Bermuda or something like that show some very impressive numbers, while the southeast coast is actually kind of small. That's just because of how much that long period energy gets decayed while it's dragging. If you can imagine, the longer period energy extends further down into the ocean, and when you get the continental shelf extend further off, that just means more shallow water that could actually sap the energy from these long period swells. And this on a swell this powerful, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We do expect some fun size waves down in South Carolina, even into Georgia. Probably they'll see some fun surf, some of those beach breaks down there. But again, nothing too special, but enough to get wet. And hey, it's kind of warm down there, right?
Yes, it is, Rob. I think they had like one of the warmest, or at least Florida. Sorry, not South Carolina. Florida had one of the warmest Februaries on record, which is something that we did not have up here. So I got another question. Eric Van Vano, sorry for the pronunciation there, wondering the best day to take off work next week if you're in the Treasure Coast. You need Mike Watson's phone number, our Florida forecaster. But early to mid next week is definitely when we're thinking the winds will start cooperating in Florida, especially around middle of next week. So check time frame out in our Central and South Florida forecast for to hone in on the details there. Let's see, we got something about Puerto Rico. And the thing about Puerto Rico, you're gonna have to be careful about winds there this weekend because, again, as we mentioned before, this thing's so big, it's gonna impact winds pretty much everywhere from Newfoundland, Canada, all the way down to the Caribbean. So, so you got to be careful with that. It actually looks like tomorrow morning in Puerto Rico is going to be pretty good, and then that front's going to move through, and we're going to get some westerly to even northwest winds, which are straight on shore for quite a bit of the part of Puerto Rico that is exposed to this swell. And that's going to happen late Saturday into Sunday, kind of continuing with some bad winds and PR on Monday. And then things will start to settle down there around the middle of the next week as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that Puerto Rico really hasn't seen too many stronger cold fronts extend that far south this winter. This winter, we've seen a lot of pretty strong high pressure dominate the western half of the North Atlantic, which kind of blocks those frontal systems from extending that far down. And that's why we've seen a lot of strong trade winds pretty much every day, just nonstop. And this is a break to the pattern. I don't know if it's a welcome break to the pattern, but some of those other spots that can deal with the northwest or west winds will be turning on. Of course, swell is going to be solid and very, very large. We're possibly thinking double XL, but basically, this break from the pattern is a nice welcome change. So some of those other spots, possibly on the east side of the island, might be a little better than the northwest side.
Thanks, Rob. And we're going to do this just for a couple more minutes. Rob's got to get back to work because he's going to be putting out the forecast within the next couple of hours for this event. And it's a pretty stressful forecast. And so thank you, Rob, for joining us and kind of explaining what you're looking at as far as the forecast goes. We're looking at the wall in Hampton, New Hampshire right now, where it's just kind of victory at sea. I think I saw the buoys have climbed to above 15 feet there now. The 44098 Jeffrey's Ledge buoy was, the last I checked, was above 15 feet. And onshore winds and quite a bit of weather. I did get one last comment about Rhode Island that we can kind of close on the forecast for Rhode Island. Rob, one of the hardest forecasts for this entire event, in my opinion, because of the, a lot of Rhode Island faces south. A lot of the swells are going to be coming from the east, but the period is going to be long enough, and it's going to eventually rotate east, southeast to southeast to where some of it's going to get in there. But what are you thinking, Alan, Rob?
I mean, Rhode Island's looking like one of the better spots of this entire swell, at least for the initial stage of the swell, while this low is still kind of lingering nearby, setting up a lot of north winds. And of course, there are quite some intricacies to the coastline of Rhode Island. There's some breaks that like a straight west wind, some that like a north wind, some that even can do a northeast wind. But basically, some of those southern facing spots in Rhode Island are looking pretty fun tomorrow. With a building swell, we're going to see some surf height pretty much build through the day on Saturday with pretty breezy offshore north winds. And then Sunday, we're expecting that's probably going to be the best day of the swell event for Rhode Island. And, Monday and Tuesday are looking pretty good too. But if you had to kind of focus on one day, possibly Sunday, but also next week, the winds are looking a little lighter. So if you're not a huge fan of kind of braving those stiff offshore north winds, then Monday and Tuesday morning might be a little better for you. Although it'll be a little smaller, but still fun size. And overall, can't really complain about it.
That's right. And again, if you're just joining in, we're actually about to end now. I'm Surfline Director of Forecasting, Mark Willis, and I've got Rob Mitstifer along with me, another forecaster. We're here from our Outer Banks office. We're going to be doing this off and on throughout this event that's going to continue through the weekend and well into next week. So be sure to like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can be alerted the next time we do this. This cam that we're looking at right now is going to be changing quite substantially as we move through the weekend. So be sure to check out that, and also check out our new website, new.surfline.com. We've completely revamped our forecast products, and we want your feedback as we continue to gradually roll those pages out. We would really appreciate it. And again, thanks everybody for joining. Any last words, Rob, before we sign off today?
Yeah, all I want to say is this is going to be one of the bigger swell events we've seen in some time. So just stay safe out there if you're paddling out. Should be fun, but safety first.
All right. Thanks, Rob. And thanks everybody for tuning in.